This video continues the coronavirus theme, and it's about herd immunity and why it's important. What is herd immunity and why is it important? Herd immunity is when the herd, in our case the human population, as a whole is immune to a disease. Now, for the herd to be immune to a disease, a large percentage of the members of the herd have to be immune, but not necessarily all. And this is called the herd immunity threshold, HIT. And this little table gives the herd immunity threshold for various diseases. So you can see for measles, it's very, very high. Between 92 and 95% of the population have to be immune for the herd to have immunity. And so on all the way down. Now at the bottom is COVID-19. Now at the moment we haven't a clue what the herd immunity threshold is, and that's why there's this big spread between 29% and 74%. I suspect it's nearer the top of the range than the bottom. And this diagram explains it a little better. This appeared in an earlier video, but there's no harm in looking at it again. This is the herd, the sort of human population in our case, and nobody is immune, so little blue spots mean that person is not immune. There are 100 blue spots in there for the purposes of this. Now people catch the disease and they recover, and with it they've got this immunity to the disease, having recovered. And these are the people in red. And here we have 10% of the population immune. But the disease continues to spread through those people who are marked in blue. And here we have a situation where half the population have had the disease, survived and are immune. I mean, some die, but I haven't put them on here. But there's still 50% of the population haven't had the disease. And so the disease continues to spread, albeit a little bit more slowly. And in this final diagram, 70% of the population have had the disease, survived and are immune, and that leaves 30% of the population who aren't immune scattered amongst them. And it's at this point, in the case of this imaginary disease, that the disease begins to disappear. And this is known as the herd immunity threshold. In this disease it's 70%. There are two ways of reaching the herd immunity threshold. The first one is immunity gained as a result of having had the disease. And the second is immunity gained by vaccination. So the downside of the first, of course, is that some people die from the disease. The upside of the second is, of course, that many fewer suffer from the disease. In other words, the incidence of the disease is small. I mean, there is a slight downside to the second in that some people suffer from a severe reaction to the vaccination, as in the case of smallpox. But the upside is massive compared with the downside. As COVID-19 is a new disease, we don't know what the HIT is, hence the 29 to 74%. And we're unlikely to have a viable vaccine before next year, which is, 9 months from now, this being the end of April. So, what's happened so far? Well, the disease is spreading through the population. It's unstoppable. And initially, we slowed the rate of spread by sort of voluntary self-isolation. And that was to help the National Health Service cope with it. And then we slowed it down even more by the introduction of lockdown by decree, in other words, by law. The government passed a law, the coronavirus, or the Corona Bill 2020. But the disease will continue to spread through the population, fast or slow, until the herd immunity threshold is reached. And only a vaccine can speed up that target, but we don't have one. Now, whether we'd allowed it to rampage through the population unhindered at the beginning, or slowed the rate of infection by regulation, the final death toll will be the same. The disease is unstoppable. The initial rampaging alternative would have overwhelmed the NHS, but the lockdown has simply delayed deaths until later. This is what might have happened had we done nothing at all. In other words, just allowed the disease to sort of rampage its way through the population. You get this big red peak here. But obviously we had to avoid that because the National Health Service couldn't cope with this little lot here. But the numbers who died are proportional to the area which I've shaded here. And this is what's likely to happen if we lift the lockdown. So we're over the peak, lift the lockdown, and you will get secondary peaks of diminishing size, and the disease will peter out about here. But if you look at the numbers of deaths, which are proportional to the area under the graph, you will see that it's very similar to the proportion of deaths in the earlier graph. And this is the possible scene if you keep the lockdown in, keep it on. You don't get these secondary infections, but the people who are dying, the deaths, is prolonged way into the turn of the year. But at the end of the day, the shaded area is the same size. In other words, it doesn't matter which we had done, whether we'd allowed it to rampage, whether we lift the lockdown or keep the lockdown on, the number of deaths will be the same at the end of it, once the herd immunity threshold is reached. Now that the NHS has loads of excess capacity in these Nightingale hospitals, 11,000 empty intensive care beds, might it not be better to lift the lockdown and get COVID-19 out of the way more quickly? Or do we want it to run on into the start of the normal winter flu season? And the problems that that might bring. It's not going to make any difference to the final death toll, but it would make a massive difference to the economic situation of jobs. I mean, do we want to prolong National Health Service frontline staff and carers in homes for elderly people? Do we want them exposed to the disease into next year? It's almost certain that the herd immunity threshold will be reached before the vaccine is ready, and by then the COVID-19 pandemic will be over. I mean, that isn't to say there won't be any further instances, but I mean there'll be very, very few. Which of the two alternatives now available to the government would you prefer? Anyway, take care, be safe. We'll see you again. Bye-bye.